Hey everybody, Mark Asley here, and we're continuing our discussion on the four pillars of masculinity. So, again, this is created by Jack Donovan, and it's really outlined in a book called The Way of Men. He talks about these four different pillars. If you're interested in, learning more about this or seeing his takes on it, I encourage you strongly to check out that book. For me, I'm kind of bringing in a lot of based on what he says, and also threading it with what I've found in my life and my work with a lot of men as a psychotherapist. So we're going to talk about the third pillar, which is mastery. So what do I mean by mastery? Mastery basically is just getting good at stuff, right? And it can be physical things, crafts, hobbies, exercise, fitness, things like that. It can be emotional things, right? Being able to master your emotions. It can be social, being able to master a social situation, public speaking, being a master of leadership, being a master of management, things like that. Or spiritual pursuits, like really mastering where you feel like your life meaning is, where your place in the world is. Mastering, your thoughts about what it means to live a fruitful life. You can find mastery in being a lover, in being a partner, in being a father. You could find mastery in art, in creativity, in a musical instrument, right? There's many different ways, there's countless ways to attain mastery in our lives. So let me talk about where this comes from and why, when I read Jack Donovan, this really came alive for me. So it's a feeling that I've felt, and a feeling that I can say, I think almost every man I've worked with has said in some extent, if not most of them, they've had this idea, and it's almost like a deep feeling. And I'd be curious, if you're listening, if you feel this way too. This idea that as men, I think especially as younger men, as men kind of growing up, we have this feeling in us that either we are growing or we are dying, right? There's no middle ground, right? There's no like even bar, and what feels like the middle ground might feel like stagnation, might feel actually like dying, like rotting away, which I think is really different. The women I work with tend to really thrive in that middle place. They really want to seek comfort or seek harmony or seek peace. They're much more about finding balance in their lives and really understanding, complex relational systems and make sure that everything is tuned properly to create a stable point, right? A stable point of harmony. Whereas with guys, there's this drive and often, at least for me, a real insecurity to keep going forward, to keep pushing forward. And I think that's mastery. I think there's something really male about that. There is, of course, the negative version, which I allude to and I certainly lived with, which is insecurity, right? Ego, having a chip on your shoulder, needing to prove yourself, needing to push harder, needing to prove to other people that you're better, stronger, smarter, whatever. I definitely had that. Went through a big phase of my life where I had to be smarter than everybody that I knew, and I'm really happy that for the most part I'm done with that. It still creeps up, and if you notice that from me, call me out on it. But um, and after proving yourself, then it becomes a little healthier, which is the of seeking mastery. And there's a couple benefits to seeking mastery, right? One is obvious, you get good at stuff, right? You're able to affect your will in the world. And I find that also as a very masculine trait. Jack Donovan talks about it in a different book. I think it's called Fire in the Dark, something like that, where he talks about this idea of what ancient men would do is build a perimeter, right? What we would do is we would go out there, we would establish a ring of safety around a village or a camp, and we would then make the camp functional, right? Women tend to bring in the culture, the art, the meaning, the history. They make things beautiful, which is really important. I don't want to downplay that at all. But men make it functional. And we take what would be like a clearing and we turn it into a campsite. And there's something about that, you take that and you extrapolate that out to technology, to science, to all the things that men seem compelled to do, tinkering, building things, improving things. Like we're in a constant place. And for me, I hold that as a very masculine trait of constantly bettering an environment. Um, there's another book called Fire in the Belly, which is about being a husband. And this idea of really husbanding, being like husbandry, right? So husbanding animals, husbanding your house, husbanding land, which is this idea of investing, putting energy into something, watching it grow, nurturing it, you know, training it, right? Like letting it become more of what it already is. That I think is very masculine. And I link mastery very strongly to this idea of husbandry, of learning how to master your environment to create a place that is safe and functional for the community, whether that be your family or that be the greater community, or even the spiritual community, something like that. I find that to be incredibly important. The other thing that comes from mastery, this is drawn more from Buddhism, is this idea that it can be a spiritual path. Something I really like about Zen Buddhism, which is the Buddhism that I tend to relate more with, is this idea that there are, 10,000 ways to the Dharma, which essentially means is you can do anything and get enlightened, but you have to do it for a long time and you have to get really good at it. And there's something in Japanese culture which is about the seeking of perfection. And perfection isn't like the best possible thing as it is in the Western view. It's more of the perfect combination of the moment, the tools, your skills, your abilities, your learning, everything coalesced into a perfect moment. And I would call that mastery, right? This idea that you're able to fully tune into something and deploy it, right? In Zen, they talk a lot about the perfect cup of tea, which exists by combining all the environment, all the ingredients, everything to make this perfect moment. I think if you are a crafts person, you can really get in the zone of figuring out something and really noticing. Say you're a carver, you can notice the different grains in the wood. You can have the mastery to use a tool in a very precise way to find the details and to really be able to shape the wood and make your imagination come alive. If you're a painter, very similar. If you're a musician, you get to learn not just how your instrument works, how to play it, but how to listen to music in a different way and how to tell the difference between different types of guitars, for instance, right? If you're a master of love and in relationships, you get to learn and pick up on the details of your lover and your partner. If you're a master of fatherhood, you get to learn about your child and really notice those fine, very fine, minute, but very powerful moments. I think those things that mastery unlocks can be a spiritual path, and I think it is a spiritual path of truly being able to notice the fine details in mundane life. Again, a very common tenet of Zen Buddhism, and something I really connect with, is the idea of finding the divine in the mundane, right? If you look at Zen art, it's often like, a blade of grass with a piece of dew on it, or a tree in the wind, or a mountain at a distance. It's these really beautiful moments of stuff that is just in the world. There's nothing magical about it. There's nothing special about it. There's nothing kind of supernatural about it. It's just really being able to tap in at that fine level to open a door. And I think practicing mastery really allows you to pursue that. You know, I think it also builds up masculine qualities, which are kind of subsets of mastery of discipline, which I think is really important. I think all men, I'll say that, I think all men benefit from building discipline, from learning how to practice something. Again, the thing doesn't actually matter, but learning how to practice, learning how to overcome challenge, learning how to structure their day, learning how to build a routine, right? Learning how to, again, take mastery and control over their life and become the author of their own story, right? There's something very masculine about being generative rather than being reactive, right? Being a force in the world that changes the world for the better rather than having the world happen to you, a way to overcome that victim mentality. I think if you become a master of life, you start to learn some of these skills of, okay, I want to get here. How do I develop a system or create discipline or develop a practice habit to get me to that goal? I want to be able to run a marathon. I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to, get a promotion at work. I want to, really, encourage my kids to feel safe and empowered. It can be, like I said, literally anything. But it's the process that is the most important of learning to overcome challenges, And I think there's also something which relates, goes back to Chogyam Trungpa, who was a Buddhist teacher that I study, where he talks about, very similar to what Zen is that it doesn't matter what you do, as long as you stick with it. And the problems that are the advanced problems and whatever you're pursuing, that is where you really grow. That's where you have to really develop this fine sense, this perception, this ability to notice things very closely, this ability to work at a very fine level, the ability to really gain extrasensory abilities in some ways, right? Like notice and hear and smell and feel things that to the untrained eye, those people don't see those things. There's a lot of benefit in that. And I think men that have mastered in their lives a few things, I don't think you can master a lot, I think you can master a few things, tend to live happier, tend to have more sense of identity, more sense of purpose. They're able to really define who they are. And they're not in a place of being open and responsive to everything, which I think sounds good on paper, but often leads to a lot of pain and suffering. In order to develop mastery, you have to say no to a lot of other things because you have to really go deep into one or two specific things. And there's a lot of benefit in that. So I hope this was helpful. Please let me know what you think about the third pillar, mastery. Let me know if there's things that you're trying to master in your life or things that you feel like you have mastered, what that process has been like to you. And when we come back, we'll talk about the fourth and final pillar, which is honor, one of my favorites. Okay, take care. Here's another vlog on masculinity.